Good Tuesday morning, Patriots, and welcome back to O'Connor's Right Stand. I'm your host, John O'Connor, software programmer by day, conservative truth seeker by night. Before we dive in today, I want to remind you about O'Connor's Quick Strike, our rapid-fire news podcast covering 3 political stories every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'm keeping episodes to around 13 minutes or so, giving you the facts and my analysis on stories the mainstream media generally won't touch. Make sure you're subscribed to both shows to get the complete picture of what's really happening in America. So yes, between the 2 podcasts, you get me 5 times a week. Well, today, we're tackling a subject that's been terrorizing American cities for years, but has only recently received the designation it's long deserved. On September 22nd, President Trump signed an executive order officially designating Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. And Patriots, this isn't just symbolic. This is a turning point in the fight to restore law and order to our streets. For too long, Antifa has operated with impunity, hiding behind the false banner of anti-fascism while employing the very tactics of intimidation, violence, and suppression that actual fascists use. They've attacked innocent Americans, assaulted law enforcement officers, destroyed billions of dollars in property, and created autonomous zones where they literally overthrew local government authority. And the entire time, they've been protected by Democrat politicians, enabled by sympathetic media, and funded by shadowy networks that have escaped scrutiny until now. So, buckle up, Patriots, because today we're going to expose the truth about Antifa. We're going to trace their origins back to communist Germany in the 1930s. We're going to document their violence and criminality. We're going to ask the hard questions about who's really pulling the strings. And we're going to explain what Trump's terrorist designation means for the future of law and order in America. The Right Stand starts now. To understand Antifa, you have to go back to where it all began, Weimar Germany in 1932, right before Hitler's rise to power. That's when the German Communist Party, the KPD, founded Anti-Fascist Action, the organization from which modern Antifa takes its name in an iconic 2-flag logo. Here's what the mainstream media won't tell you about the original Antifa. It wasn't some noble resistance movement fighting to save democracy. It was a militant communist organization operating under Stalin's doctrine of social fascism. This doctrine declared that anyone who wasn't a communist was essentially a fascist and an enemy of the people. The KPD labeled the Social Democrats, the moderate left-wing party that was actually trying to preserve democracy, as social fascists and declared them the main enemy. In 1931, the KPD passed a resolution calling the Social Democratic Party the main pillar of dictatorship of a capital. They literally said that fighting the moderate Democrats was just as important as fighting Hitler and the Nazis. Think about the insanity of that position, Patriots. Instead of unifying the left against the actual Nazi threat, the communists spent their energy attacking democratic institutions and anyone who didn't support their revolutionary agenda. Sound familiar? It should, because that's exactly what we see today. Modern Antifa doesn't distinguish between mainstream conservatives, Trump supporters, and actual extremists. To them, we're all fascists, deserving of violence. If you support law enforcement, you're a fascist. If you support border control, you're a fascist. If you believe in traditional American values, you're a fascist, and therefore a legitimate target for assault. The original Antifa failed spectacularly in their stated mission. Their refusal to work with democratic forces actually helped pave the way for Hitler's seizure of power in 1933. Once the Nazis took over, both the communists and their Antifa militants were crushed and sent underground. After World War II, the movement re-emerged, but it wasn't until the 1980s in West Germany that the modern incarnation of Antifa took shape. This new version came out of the squatter movement and anarchist circles, people who rejected not just capitalism, but all forms of government and social order. They adopted the aesthetics and name of the 1930s movement, but added anarchist ideology to the Communist Foundation. Then, it spread to America. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, leftist punk bands in the United States started forming anti-racist action groups, which would eventually evolve into the Antifa cells we see terrorizing our cities today. By 2007, groups like Rose City Antifa in Portland had organized into more formal networks, preparing for the chaos they would unleash over the next 2 decades. Let's talk about what Antifa has actually done, because the media tries to gaslight us into thinking they're just passionate protesters fighting against fascism. The reality is a documented history of violence, destruction, and domestic terrorism. One of their most infamous attacks occurred when conservative speaker Milo was scheduled to speak at UC Berkeley. About 1,500 peaceful protesters showed up, and then approximately 150 black-clad Antifa militants arrived and turned the event into a war zone. These weren't protesters, patriots. They were a paramilitary force wearing masks to conceal their identities. They threw Molotov cocktails and commercial-grade fireworks at police officers. They set fires, including lighting a generator-powered spotlight ablaze. They tore down metal barriers and threw them through windows. They caused over $100,000 in damage to the campus, and an additional $600,000 in damage to downtown when they marched through Berkeley vandalizing banks and businesses. The university had to cancel the event and evacuate Milo just for his safety. And here's the kicker. Campus police made exactly 1 arrest that night. 1. Despite 150 masked militants causing nearly $750,000 in damage and assaulting people with incendiary devices. Later that year, Antifa continued their attacks at Berkeley, going after Trump supporters at multiple rallies. They used pepper spray, baseball bats, and tasers to assault people whose only crime was supporting the President of the United States. A journalist covering the protest was violently beaten simply for reporting what was happening. Then we have the summer of 2020, when Antifa took their violence to an entirely new level. Following the death of George Floyd, cities across America erupted into protests. Many were peaceful, but Antifa cells hijacked these protests and turned them into riots that caused between $1 and $2 billion in property damage and resulted in at least 19 deaths. In Portland, the violence continued for over 100 consecutive nights. More than 6,000 uses of force were documented by police as they tried to maintain order. Antifa militants attacked federal courthouses, set fires, threw explosives, and created chaos in the streets. And the mainstream media called it mostly peaceful protests. But perhaps the most audacious Antifa action came in Seattle, where militants actually seized control of several city blocks and declared it the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ. Let that sink in. They literally overthrew local government, expelled police, installed their own armed security, and established their own system of governance. This wasn't protest. This was an insurrection, and it led to multiple shootings, violence, and deaths before authorities finally shut it down weeks later. In July 2019, an Antifa militant attacked an ICE facility in Tacoma, Washington. He was heavily armed and attempted to ignite a 500-gallon propane tank while throwing incendiary devices. This was a terror attack, plain and simple, an attempt to cause mass casualties at a federal immigration facility. He was killed by police after refusing to drop his weapon. In August 2020, a self-identified Antifa member shot and killed a Patriot Prayer supporter during a riot in Portland. The shooter was later killed by law enforcement while trying to avoid arrest on murder charges. In February 2024, a transgender Antifa terrorist detonated an explosive device outside the office of Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall, leaving behind Antifa slogans and anarchist symbols. In March 2023, Antifa radicals laid siege to a police training facility construction site in Atlanta, attacking officers with Molotov cocktails, booby traps, and commercial-grade fireworks. Now, fast forward to 2025, and we're seeing an explosion of Antifa violence specifically targeting immigration and customs enforcement. ICE officers have faced a staggering 1,000% increase in assaults since Trump took office in January. 1,000%. On July 4th, 2025, left-wing extremists coordinated an ambush on an ICE detention center in Prairie Land, Texas, opening fire and seriously wounding 2 officers. Since June 2025, Antifa has maintained a siege of the ICE facility in Portland. They've thrown rocks, launched fireworks, attacked agents with incendiary devices, and created a constant state of danger for federal law enforcement. But Antifa's tactics go beyond street violence. They've pioneered a particularly insidious form of terrorism: doxing. That's the practice of publishing private information about their targets online. Home addresses, family member names, photos of their children, all designed to intimidate and endanger people who oppose their agenda. Rose City Antifa, the Portland cell, illegally doxed dozens of ICE officers, publishing their names, pictures, and home addresses on websites and public flyers posted in their neighborhoods. These flyers included threatening messages like "No peace for ICE" and explicit threats in Spanish against immigration enforcement. Think about what this means. Gang members, drug traffickers, human smugglers, all the criminals that ICE is trying to deport, now have access to the home addresses and family information of the agents trying to stop them. This isn't activism. This is painting targets on the backs of federal law enforcement and their families. They also target conservative speakers, activists, and journalists. Andy Ngo, a senior editor who has extensively covered Antifa violence, has been violently assaulted multiple times, hospitalized with brain bleed, and faces constant death threats. Why? Because he documents what they do and exposes their tactics to the American people. Now we need to ask the uncomfortable question that the mainstream media refuses to address. Why has Antifa been allowed to operate with such impunity for so long? The answer is as disturbing as it is simple. Many Democratic politicians find Antifa useful. After Portland's 2020 riots, the county district attorney's office announced they would decline to prosecute most of the people arrested. Anyone who didn't use force, steal, or damage property would be released without charges. You could participate in a riot and face 0 consequences. Berkeley police made 1 arrest during a riot, causing $750,000 of damage. Seattle allowed CHAZ to exist for weeks before finally taking action. This pattern repeats across Democratic-controlled cities. As journalist Andy Ngo pointed out, when conservative events are shut down with violence, Republicans can't engage in the democratic process. When Trump supporters are afraid to wear MAGA hats in public, when speakers have to cancel appearances due to security threats, all of this benefits the Democrat Party by suppressing opposition voices. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek's own legislative director was arrested at a violent Antifa attack in September of 2020 and was later promoted to senior advisor. That's not an accident. That's a statement about whose side they're on. Organizing nationwide riots requires money. Where does it come from? Antifa deliberately operates through decentralized cells with no official leadership or transparent finances. But someone's paying for all of this. President Trump has repeatedly stated that these are professional agitators who are paid a lot of money by rich people, some of whom we know. He specifically called for investigations into those funding Antifa operations under RICO statutes. A Capital Research Center report found that George Soros' Open Society foundations have given more than $80 million to groups tied to terrorism or extreme violence, including at least $23 million to 7 groups that provide material support to domestic terrorism. Now, Soros and his foundation deny funding Antifa directly, and there's no smoking gun showing direct payments to masked militants. But the money trail exists. Billionaire donors fund foundations, which give grants to activist organizations, which then provide solidarity and mutual aid to Antifa cells. For example, the Sunrise Movement received at least $2 million from the Open Society and has endorsed and solicited financial support for Antifa-associated groups, like this Stop Cop City coalition in Atlanta. the same coalition linked to the Molotov cocktail attacks on police. These groups operate what they call solidarity funds, which post bail, provide legal defense, and, according to prosecutors, supply ammunition, surveillance equipment, handheld radios, drones, and camping supplies to militants. That's not legal defense, patriots. That's material support for ongoing criminal operations. This funding structure creates plausible deniability at each level. But Trump's executive order specifically directs federal agencies to investigate and dismantle the funding sources behind Antifa operations. Following the money is how you take down organized criminal enterprises. So, what does Trump's September 22nd executive order actually do? Is this just symbolic, or does it have real teeth? The order states that Antifa, and I quote, is a militarist anarchist enterprise that explicitly calls for the overthrow of the United States government, law enforcement authorities, and our system of law. It uses illegal means to organize and execute a campaign of violence and terrorism nationwide to accomplish these goals. The order designates Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization and directs all relevant executive departments and agencies to utilize all applicable authorities to investigate, disrupt, and dismantle any and all illegal operations conducted by Antifa or any person claiming to act on behalf of Antifa. Critically, it also calls for investigation and prosecution against those who fund such operations. Critics argue that the president doesn't have the legal authority to designate domestic terrorist organizations, since no statute exists like the one for foreign terrorists. They are technically correct about that narrow legal point, but here's what they're missing. The order doesn't create new laws. It directs federal agencies to use existing authorities more aggressively. The Department of Homeland Security has already arrested dozens of Antifa-aligned violent extremists under existing federal laws. They are being charged with assault on federal officers, destruction of federal property, and making terroristic threats, as well as possession of explosives. The designation signals to federal prosecutors that these cases should be top priority with maximum penalties. On September 26, Trump issued a national security presidential memorandum establishing a comprehensive national strategy coordinated through the National Joint Terrorism Task Force. It directs investigation of not just the people committing violence, but the organized structures, networks, entities, and financial infrastructure behind the organized campaigns of violence. Under federal conspiracy laws, you don't have to personally throw a Molotov cocktail to face serious charges if you helped organize, fund, or facilitate the operation. This isn't about arresting people at riots anymore. This is about dismantling the entire infrastructure that enables Antifa to operate. Antifa and their supporters have already begun mounting illegal challenges. Oregon and Portland filed a lawsuit against Trump's deployment of National Guard troops to protect federal facilities, claiming it breached the principles of the U.S. Constitution. Think about the absurdity of that, patriots. Federal law enforcement facilities are under siege. Agents are being assaulted at record rates, and when the president deploys troops to protect federal property, Democrat politicians sue to stop him. Civil liberty groups claim that Antifa is an ideology, not an organization, and that targeting people for their political beliefs violates free speech protections. Here's my response. The First Amendment protects your right to believe whatever you want and to peacefully assemble. It does not protect your right to commit violence, destroy property, or assault federal officers. When you mask up, grab weapons, and participate in coordinated attacks on law enforcement, you've crossed from protected speech to criminal conduct. So, what should Americans expect in the coming months? First, expect more arrests. DHS and the FBI are coordinating through the Joint Terrorism Task Forces to investigate Antifa networks nationwide, building cases against organizers and funders. RICO charges are on the table. Second, expect legal challenges in every major prosecution. But the Trump administration appears committed to fighting through these battles, and with video evidence and documented patterns of organized violence, they have strong cases. Third, expect media spin portraying every Antifa arrest as persecution of peaceful protesters. We need to stay informed and not let the narrative be controlled by people who've been covering for Antifa all along. Fourth, expect Antifa to escalate before they're beaten. They've already called for the militant reinforcements and vowed to escalate their rioting. The confrontation in Portland could get uglier before federal law enforcement establishes control. But ultimately, this is a fight that had to happen. You cannot maintain a civilized society when organized groups are allowed to commit violence with impunity. Patriots, we're at a crossroads. The question before us is simple. Will America be governed by laws applied equally to all, or will we descend further into tribal warfare where different sides operate under different rules? Antifa represents everything that's wrong with the radical left. They are violent. They are anarchists. They seek to overthrow our system of government. They use terrorism and intimidation to suppress speech they disagree with. And for years, they've been protected by Democrat politicians who find their violence useful. But the protection is ending. Trump's designation is the first step in a long process of restoring order to American streets. It won't be easy. It will be contested every step of the way. The media will lie about it. Democrats will fight. And Antifa will escalate before they are beaten. But it's necessary. Because if we don't stand up to political violence now, if we don't hold domestic terrorists accountable, if we don't protect the right of Americans to express their political views without fear of assault, then we risk losing everything that makes America exceptional. The terrorist designation is not about suppressing dissent. It's about protecting the rule of law. It's about ensuring that political differences are resolved through democratic processes, not through Molotov cocktails and mob violence. It's about declaring that in America, you don't get to burn down cities because you lost an election. Antifa's history goes back to communist Germany, where their ideological predecessors helped pave the way for tyranny by attacking democratic institutions. Their modern incarnation has brought violence and chaos to American cities for years. But their run may finally be coming to an end. We'll keep watching the story closely, Patriots, because it's not just about Antifa. It's about whether America can still function as a nation of laws. Trump has drawn the line. Now we'll see if our institutions have the strength to enforce it. Well, that's our show for today, Patriots. The truth about Antifa is finally coming out, and Trump is taking action. Keep spreading the word about what's really happening, because you won't get honest coverage from the mainstream media. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe, follow, or like button. It really does help me out, and thank you in advance. Once done here, head on over and check out O'Connor's Quick Strike. Remember, Quick Strike airs Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. This podcast is Tuesdays and Thursdays. Have a great rest of your day. This is O'Connor's Right Stand, and I'll be back next time with more truth the establishment doesn't want you to hear. Until then, stay strong, stay informed, and never stop fighting for the country we love. This is John O'Connor, signing off.